Thanks everybody for joining the Rocha Revolution here on Substack. I am so honored today to be joined by my brother Rafael Ray Collazo, who is basking in the glow of a good old-fashioned ass whooping that we put on folks in Virginia and in New Jersey last night. Not to mention Supreme Court races in Pennsylvania, statewide stuff in Georgia. We're going to get to all of that. Let me do the proper introduction to my boy Rafa without any printed material because I have known his old ass for a long time. But Ray is running the Unidos Action Fund C4. He's also works as like in the political department, running things over in the C3 with lots of great folks over there. And we have worked with him at Solidarity for years. And when folks used to call me about, well, what are we going to do about all these growing Latinos in Jersey and in Philadelphia? And I needed to learn my way around up there. Back when I didn't know shit from Shinola, Ray would take me around. Collazo would tell me about North Philly and the history of Puerto Ricans in North Philly, and all of these folks would move to Allentown and Bethlehem and Reading, and he showed me and guided me through all of that back in the day. I'm lucky enough to have been working with him now for, good God, 16 years. 16 years. Me and him have earned all of these white hairs in our grills. But Rafa, thank you so much for joining us today, and congratulations on a great victory last night.
Well, brother, thank you, Chuck. You were a big part of that and have been a big part of our movement for some time. And, I just want to thank you, first of all, for all your service and your team at Solidarity. It's always a pleasure to work with you. And it's a bucket list moment for me. I've been enjoyed your content for some time. I'm as much a fan as a friend, and really looking forward to this conversation with the Rocha Revolution. I guess the Rocha Revolutionaries.
There are Rufineris.
So look
We
forward to the
are
conversation.
we are a bunch of professionales over here. Just I'm telling everybody, that's my word. Rafa, I think it's important for folks to know that you are not just some highly paid, skilled, democratic nonprofit uh, strategist. Give us a little flavor on how you ended up in Philly, in Jersey, and how your family and your journey to get to where you are today. Kind of walk us through that.
Yeah, I think the journey is very, very typical in a lot of ways. In that for people that don't, people I think generally know the migration of Puerto Ricans from a few generations back, kind of in New York and somewhat Chicago. But Philadelphia was sort of the next big community on the East Coast, traditional Puerto Rican community. So we've had Puerto Rican Day Parade and Puerto Rican-led nonprofit organizations for going on 55 years. In terms of my political journey, I kind of come at it from the legacies of my family. So my mother's dad, my grandfather, and Chuck, you know a little of this history. He actually got politicized, coming from the campo in Puerto Rico, growing up dirt poor, and with a single mom, and finding the U.S. military as an outlet to progress. He actually got politicized by Mexican Americans in the U.S. Army in the late 50s, and when he was based out in Fort Bliss, I think it is, out in El Paso,
That's
and
bliss.
they got him involved in the Viva Kennedy campaign in 1960.
Wow.
So my family got involved in politics with Mexican Americans in 1960. And so he returned to the island and became a political operative, and actually is most known for in island politics as the sergeant of arms of the Puerto Rican legislature in the late 80s. So a lot of these issues, when these issues bubble up around decorum in U.S. Congress, and, I always think about the work that my grandfather did to keep quorum as best he could in the Puerto Rican legislature in those days, and was kind of the first, was a GOTV director in the interior of the island. So a lot of interesting history. So very much my family on my mother's side is very much about, the importance of civic engagement and democracy, and but doing things in a like a spirit of decorum, or whatever that phrase is. And then, and my mother's career was all about neighborhood mediation and neighborhood resolving neighborhood disputes. She was one of the first Latinas to work for the city government in Philly starting in late 70s. Had a great career with city service. Then my dad was a radical. My dad was a Brown Power guy. My dad was a Bronx Puerto Rican and raised in Philly as a teenager, and was in the Young Lords, which many of your listeners are familiar with. Is sort of, after the Black Civil Rights Movement and the preceding Black Power movement, they created this Brown Power movement, which included the various Chicano radical movements of the time, and the Puerto Rican contribution to that was even large, and that was always my political upbringing, kind of like, kind of this one hand, being very much kind of part of the importance of being involved in the system to make things done, but kind of having knowing the streets and kind of being passionate about um, equity for our community and across the country. And the Philly part is a big part of that. And I want your listeners to know is that without the work and the engagement of the Black community, and first of all, giving my parents opportunities with being city workers and public sector employee union members, and then in Black politics, that people remember in the '80s when major cities like Chicago and Philadelphia had their first Black mayors. My family was part of that small group of Latinos that are part of the Wilson Good coalition in Philadelphia. So, those elements are kind of what make me the political operative that I am today.
Well, that's an amazing story, and I think it's a story that's told, as you said, throughout time with lots of generations of Puerto Ricans who have migrated to our country and to their country through New York and Philly and Chicago. And, the one thing I knew as you had grown up there was that if you needed to know something about Philly and for that matter, Jersey Latinos, Rafa was the guy you went to because he knew the history, he knew the movers, he knew the players. So he's the perfect one to have on the podcast today to ask him about not only New Jersey, we'll get to Virginia and we'll get to the Supreme Court races in Pennsylvania. But Ralph, I'm just dying to know what and how your takeaways were from the New Jersey elections. I know you and Unidos and the C4 did a bunch of work over in New Jersey. And I know you've worked on a lot of these races. Just 4 years ago, Murphy barely pulls out a win with 2.5%. And then last night, she wins in double digits and just whoops ass. Not only my question is about what changed, but what was the biggest takeaway last night of what this dramatic shift back was about?
Wow, there's so much there, Chuck, and that's a whole podcast in of itself. But look, I think that I'll be very honest with you. I expected a victory, and I expected Democratic support for Democrats to claw back some of their support. But we didn't anticipate. We were on the ground every day. We didn't anticipate the full extent of the blowout. I mean, I think all of it matters. I mean, at the end of the day, if you look at it from a Latino perspective, you look at it from kind of an independent voter perspective, or kind of soft potential, Democratic leaning voters, the other side just don't have much to offer anybody. And I think all the pieces led to that. So when you think about Latinos that told us, that 10% shift or so in the case of New Jersey, to Trump, in terms of overall Republican support, the argument was, well, two things. One is kind of the social issues. So because there's growing, I would argue, Christian nationalist movement that's starting to permeate within the Latino community, and we'll get to that. But on the economic stuff, they were saying everything was about the economy. Everything's and costs of living. And so fast forward a year later, Latinos, anyone that's has their eyes open, and I think you saw that from the results in Jersey across the board, is that this administration has not only improved matters between tariffs and these other shenanigans, they're making matters worse. And their focus seems to be on everything but what impacts working people, and we can go into the theatrics and the impact of things like, the golden bathrooms and tearing down the East Wing and having great Gatsby parties when SNAP benefits are being cut. And so I think the cumulative effect of people seeing that uh, trajectory over the last 9 months, adding to the fact, particularly from a Latino perspective, that we have a horror movie in our phone every day, which is the videos we see about ICE enforcement in Latino neighborhoods around the country. And so we're horrified by the images that we're seeing. We're horrified by the possibility of that being one of our loved ones or ourselves. And I think the cumulative effect of those dynamics and other things led to the result that we saw.
Yeah, and we were seeing that on the ground in New Jersey as well. We were fortunate at Solidarity to get a contract this year with the coordinated campaign. And we helped them do some canvassing. We did some digital ads for Unidos. We were around this election in lots of different ways. And the thing that kept coming back were these utility rate hikes were real. And when you heard Mikey Sherrill talk about utility rates, folks in other places were like, what is she doing? Because it is real and a real problem
Big
in New Jersey. And the other thing that was unexpected is the way that folks really were talking about insurance premiums. They're really angry about not only the ACA stuff and the doubling of the premiums, but just regular everyday insurance is costing. And if you're in a union, every bit of your raise that you could have gotten this year is all going towards your health care. And sometimes that's not even enough. And they're having to take more money to make ends meet while these corporations and these healthcare companies are just like making all the money. And folks get that piece. And something that we miss sometimes is the anxiety that's out there in the electorate. And Donald Trump actually tagged into it. He kind of got into that with the voters and got them to trust him, even though he didn't mean it, because he was picking at their anxiety and saying, I'll be your retribution. I'll help you fight the rich people, even though he was one of the ones they should have been fighting. He used that to try to separate people. And that all turned on its head last night because folks gave him a shot. And the last piece I'll say to that point is the little bit you said about the immigration stuff. Immigration was not the issue that drove people, some people, but not the majority of Latinos. But think of it as a lingering cloud of rain following you. You went there because you were sick and tired of having your dollar not go as far at the grocery store or with utilities. But then you're also tired of this constant, what Rafa just describes as this shit show on your phone every day that gives you automatic anxiety about people that you love, whether you're related to them, they're your friends, or they're in your social circles about their tias, their tios, their abuela. Somebody that's been an immigrant here and a law-abiding immigrant, it may have come undocumented 15, 20 years ago, that they may actually get deported. And you may have voted for Donald Trump because just like with Chuck Rocha, you agree that an immigrant that comes here and has some heinous crime should be deported. Most common sense people agree with that, but not the folks who've been here paying taxes, not breaking any laws, who become a part of the fabric of this country. That's where people really drew the line to say, no, 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 no. And then when you start putting military in the street, folks in Puerto Rico understand military in the street. They've lived through what they've lived through on their islands, and it's lots of bad reminders. And do you see any of that stuff also crossing over, Rafa, into the Virginia election as well?
Oh, absolutely. You know, we were very proud, the Unidos US Action Fund Action PAC, to have robust operation, get out the vote operations, both in New Jersey and Virginia. And, you know, first of all, talking about the, local dynamics, right? So in Northern Virginia, you not only have the cumulative impact on the economy of federal employees being either impacted by Doge or these more recent, government shutdown, but that includes a lot of Latino federal employees, federal workers that moved to Northern Virginia for these
And contractors.
and contractors. Then you go down to, and we had a very robust campaign and a great GOT rally recently in Virginia Beach. And for people that don't know from around the country, that's obviously a big naval base and naval headquarters. And a lot of Latinos that live in Virginia settle into the Virginia Beach Bay Area as people that are part of military veterans, and they're impacted in a variety of ways by the government shutdown and some of these policies. And a lot of them rely on the Veterans Administration as retired service members and all of these government services that that we have a sort of a contract on some level with our veterans, and we're going to take care of them, are being impacted. And so Latinos are seeing it on a lot of levels and and it started with the ICE raids and the interventions right at the beginning of the administration. We've seen the systematic attack, whether it's through these economic uh, downers in our economies or the immigrant enforcement stuff. There's these attacks on our Latino microeconomies. So we're seeing this, Chuck, in New Jersey, Virginia, around the country. Latino business owners that have businesses in Hispanic business corridors seeing harder to retain employees, harder to there's less foot traffic in our neighborhoods because people are just scared to be out there in the streets living their lives, and they're impacted by the tariffs because they get a lot of their goods from Latin America. So there's a lot of levels in which Latinos in Virginia are being impacted. by this administration, and yesterday was an opportunity for people to express themselves, and I think the rebuke was very strong.
A lot of people may not realize there was an election last night in Pennsylvania. I know that you've spent a lot of time in Pennsylvania. You've headed up a lot of Latino work in Pennsylvania and a lot of work overall. And you're seen as one of the leaders in that community. Can you explain to people how the Supreme Court works in Pennsylvania and when the election are and who was up in this last election and how you did last night?
Yeah, so after the initial for the state Supreme Court in Pennsylvania, after they serve an initial 10-year term, they don't have to compete against any another judge, but they do have to be retained. So basically, there was three democratically elected state Supreme Court justices. These folks were part of some seminal decisions as it related to protecting women's reproductive rights, redistricting, voting rights, and so these three have been very key in kind of maintaining some normalcy here in Pennsylvania politics and our political environment. And so they basically were up for a retainment. So you had to they have to get the majority of yeses to be retained. So the Republicans invested, Chuck, you know the numbers, but an unprecedented amount of money for an election like this because they saw an opportunity to potentially pick off one or two Democrats on a very tight state Supreme Court. We expected them to win narrow majorities. They won overwhelming majorities. I think they were in the high 70s to 80% retainment. So those three judges will remain on the state Supreme Court in Pennsylvania. Will have still a strong Democratic progressive majority. So there was also wanted to note talking about the future of Pennsylvania, which we're seeing some disturbing trends from the last election with Trump winning. But on the positive side, you're seeing Latinos stepping up. So we just had the first Latino mayor elected in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, Jaime Arroyo. Matt Turk, who's a good friend of this program, was reelected yesterday. Reelected also in Allentown as the mayor of Allentown, Pennsylvania. So you have the three major cities on the 222 corridor, Lancaster, Reading, and Allentown, that have Hispanic mayors. So thinking about, if we don't invest, and this is a message that I want to get out there to the Democratic operatives out there, Democratic stakeholders, if we don't invest in this emerging Latino electorate, which is the driver for economic growth in the state and literal growth, if you took the Hispanic numbers out of the state demographics, the state would be losing population. That is how old and non-diverse most of the state is. So when you're looking at where's the political energy in the country? Look at in the state. Look at the 222 corridor. Three Hispanic mayors in the major cities. In the case of Mr. Arroyo, young, energetic, a lot of energy, a lot of enthusiasm. Some other local races that were won first time by Hispanics, and so we need to make major investments collectively in mobilizing and turning around the trend that we saw last year in the Hispanic vote statewide, or Pennsylvania becomes Ohio. So we have a decision we need to make right now about how we're going to invest in Pennsylvania for the next, in this case, 2+ years, so that Pennsylvania becomes more like Virginia and not more like Ohio. And so there's some notable things there with Pennsylvania that people should note. But I just came back, Chuck, from one of your old stomping grounds. We had the Pennsylvania Latino Convention in Pittsburgh for the first time. And so I co-keynoted with our dear sister, Congresswoman Summer Lee. And the message that came out of that was Latino leaders in Western Pennsylvania saying our numbers are exploding, our business chambers exploding. We have no infrastructure, political infrastructure to organize the burgeoning Hispanic communities in Western Pennsylvania. And so that's just one example of opportunity that Democrats and progressives have to build a coalition that absolutely is going to be necessary for Pennsylvania in 2026 and 2028. But we need to start investing in it right now.
Well, keep me updated if you need some more membership in that western part of the state. Young Charles Rocha, the steam fitter out there with the Rocha boys, my grandboys will sign up. I'll get you 3 new members immediately, and we'll put that boy to work when he's on shutdown.
100%.
To recap, for those of you listening, what Rafa was saying, if you weren't following, is there's now a Latino mayor in eastern Pennsylvania in Reading, Lancaster, and Allentown.
All 3 major cities.
All 3 major cities in eastern. Now, that used to be a steelworker stronghold, and it's still a lot of retirees there. There's not as much manufacturing as there was back in the day, especially around Bethlehem. When Bethlehem Steel was there, it ran 22 miles down that river. A lots of other light manufacturing there now. Like, this is the evolution of those communities, right? And this is why those voters are up for grabs. They're not voters that have been through there for a long time. They are new voters that have moved there. There's lots of second and third generation Latinos there now. They're making their way more and being noticed. You know, Matt Turk in Allentown is one of our favorites. Matt, if you don't follow the Allentown mayor, you should follow Matt Turk on his social medias, because that boy is out riding his bicycle around the city. He was riding his bike
this morning, Chuck. He was
You were?
He was jogging this morning, celebrating the results of
Of
his.
course he was. He needs to eat a cheeseburger. He's about as big around as my leg. That's because he's always out there running or riding a bicycle. But Matt is a great guy, and he's a regular listener. Hat tip to Matt on this program, and we've had him on before. And then the way that this all kind of comes together for the midterms, you may say, well, Chuck, you said the same turnout. You can't measure apples to apples here, because the midterm elections will have a lot more people than what we saw voting in Pennsylvania for some judge retainment or for New Jersey off-year governor's election. But think about a place that Rafa just described, which is this eastern part. Some would call it the Lehigh Valley part of eastern Pennsylvania. One of the most marginal congressional seats in America sits in that valley. And it was represented by Democrats. It's been represented by Republicans. Hell, I even ran a steelworker named Ed O'Brien for Congress there back in 1998 and 2000s. Like, it's where Pat Toomey came from. And we just lost that seat with Donald Trump running on top of the ticket just a year ago, when a congresswoman that was a Democrat named Miss Wild got defeated there. And so we have a lot of folks running as Democrats. There'll be a big primary. There's a Latina running. There's a firefighter running. But that seat will be, if I use my words right, emblematic of what could happen in lots of congressional seats. If you have this Latino vote, go back to performing the way it did before. But I will tell you this, it's not going to happen if we continue to do the same things that we've been doing over and over again and thinking that last night is some silver bullet. We got to get back to talking about affordability issues. We can't spend all of our time talking about abortions or democracy, even though those are very important issues. Folks right now are hyper-focused on just trying to make a living as things go up in their everyday lives, and they're looking for solutions. Democrats, you can talk about why Donald Trump sucks and all the bad things that he's done to destroy the middle class, while at the same time giving your vision about what we can do to make their lives better. That's what we really have to do as a whole. That's what folks are really looking for us to do. We've done a really good job at doing the first part. And last night we pretty much did that, even though there was a lot of talk about affordability. There was a lot more talk about what we were doing and what can be our plans for the future. I think we lost Rafa. Let me see if I can get him added back in. There we go. Doop, doop, doop. I'll get that. High-tech redneck, hang with us for a moment. I'm getting him invited back in. He's probably got some of that shady New Jersey internet connection, or a bill collector was calling him. But last night, let's continue this conversation. Hopefully Rafa can join us. But there were other elections that were going on in places in Pennsylvania. In Bucks County, there were school board elections where just a year before, we had seen Republicans gain a bunch of different seats. And now, because of last night, Democrats had swept all of those Republicans out in a wave election because of the excitement in the air last night. And there's something that voters like. Voters like winners. They like for you to be able to stand up and fight for them. And I think that's why you saw a lot of this happening. Let's talk about a county in try to invite Rafa back in one more time. I think he's having problems with his internet. There's a place I want to make a point about in Virginia. It's called Manassas City. And in Manassas City, I'm telling a story, Rafa, about Virginia. In Manassas City, it's about half Latinos in Manassas City, Virginia. And it's a very Democratic area. And a year ago, Kamala Harris won by 20 points. My God, can you imagine? She won by 20 points. Great place for her. Big Democratic stronghold. Well, last night, Spanberger wins that little city by 43 points. more than doubling Kamala Harris's, right? Now, you may say to me, well, that's what I'm talking about, Chuck. It's wavier. Then they back to voting, and Mexicans just back to voting for them Democrats. Well, the ones who voted for sure overwhelmingly voted for a Democrat. But let me give you a little behind the curtains for you nerds. There's only 17,000 people in this district, in this little city. And during the presidential election, 6,000 people showed up in that little community to vote. And it went 20% for Kamala Harris. Now, last night, only 3,900 people voted, and she won by 43%. So you got to ask yourself, is this a turnout or a persuasion strategy as we move into the midterms? This is where the real Scientology comes into the strategery. Look at all them big words. When you're figuring out the strategy of how you're going to win a midterm. Because if you're just weighing a presidential turnout performance against an off-year election, you're going to mislead yourself in what you're looking for in respondents to what the solution is for the strategy, because it become a lot less folks voting, even though our performance was higher. So it becomes math, but just keep that in mind as you're thinking about your strategies for the midterms, because it will not, turnout will not be anywhere near where it was for the presidential. It could be a very high mid-election turnout like it was in 2018. But that's how you can mess up and start trying to turn out low propensity voters who could, in fact, be Donald Trump voters, because now they have a higher propensity to be those voters. Rafa, what do you think about a lot of that?
You know, there's some science to that has to be delved into, but I think in terms of what's important is to learn some of the fundamental lessons that we got like at the Unidos US Action Pact. Is that what we heard consistently, and this even goes beyond New Jersey, Virginia, in terms of the accountability work we're doing around the country and with listening sessions and community town halls, is that Latinos are really craving a seat at the table, and they want to be heard, they want to be listened to, and they want to see investment, um, and they want to see leaders that are championing their issues. And so, one of the things that we heard when we were having engagement, and you're talking about Manassas, shout out to Walter Tejada and Javier Cuevas and um, Ms. Bustillos that led our Northern Virginia outreach, Carmen Feliciano, our colleague at Unidos, that we had town halls and GOTV events in those communities, Arlington, Alexander, and those counties. And, we heard it too many times that it was, we really appreciate this opportunity that Unidos US Action Pack has given us, because we don't feel like we get heard in these discussions around the political direction of our state, even by elected officials that we have relationships with, because it feels very transactional. They come in, they have an event, and they leave. We actually, really focused on listening and giving the local leaders an opportunity to share why these elections and why it was important in this case to elect Bamberger and Cheryl. And the other thing that we found, last year, Chuck, there was a lot of pessimism about the need for field activity after last year. Well, everybody's on their phone, and that thing about knocking on doors don't make a difference. We actually found the opposite this year. For whatever reason, people were more apt to open the doors, particularly in places like New Jersey, and they were very appreciative of just getting basic information about the candidates. They were pretty clear they weren't going to support Trump or anyone Trump aligned, but they want to know what Mikey Sherrill has done in her history that's shown that she's championed our community, and they want to know more about her, the person. So that basic outreach really paid big dividends, I think, for the work we did and for the Democratic candidates writ large. So, regardless of how we do the targeting, there's some science to that, but I think the fundamentals around listening to the Latino community, investing in the Latino community, elevating the voices of local leaders, and real engagement. And it could be on social and digital, and this is obviously an example of that. But real authentic engagement, Chuck, I want to share with your audience something. You're talking about you're one of the gurus around having customized campaigns for specific Latino communities. Our field campaign was in two communities, Camden, New Jersey, and Vineland, New Jersey. That's Camden County and Cumberland County. Cumberland County is one of the two heavy Hispanic counties in New Jersey that flipped back. That was traditionally a Democratic county, flipped to Trump, and flipped back to the Democrats last night. Those two communities are an hour from each other. They couldn't be more different. Camden, New Jersey is hard crabble street. People know the history, the riots, and has been a symbol, unfortunately, for decades of, urban decay. And Camden, New Jersey is a wonderful place. I have a lot of warm memories of. We have a lot of wonderful leaders there. Our strategy, Chuck, with engaging the community included and I know you love those pictures. Los Leathers Jeep Club. Los Leathers Jeep Club are a bunch of Latino families. And I'm saying families because there's a lot of women involved in children too. It's not just the guys. And this group loves their cars, loves their Jeeps. Puerto Ricans, we love loud caravans and stuff. But let me tell you, when you saw these tough guys walk up with their leather jackets, you know what patches were on their leather jackets, Chuck? Cancer warrior, against domestic violence, autism awareness. They do an annual toy drive, this Jeep Club. This is the kind of they're going to be supporting food pantries during the government shutdown and SNAP benefits. These are the kind of real Latino leaders in these communities that people follow. And by the way, yeah, do they have loud, obnoxious cars and blast reggaeton and stuff? Yeah, but guess what? That's part of our culture, and that's part of how we do engagement. I drive an hour down to Vineland. Brother, it's like going back in time. It's like being in Puerto Rico in the 70s in the Campo. These are Puerto Ricans that came from Puerto Rican migrant farm worker grandparents in the 50s and 60s. They still are very traditional. They dress properly. They're bilingual. They really have a sense of very old school, rural Latin American style. And in the 11th hour, I went on Spanish language radio and implored the community. And our team was a group of primarily retired Latina teachers, ESL teachers specifically, and are very connected with the local churches and very respected community elders. And so our our styles and our leadership and the faces and the leaders of our local campaigns were completely different, but the issues were the same: affordability and having a seat at the table around these issues. So it's there you can't pay persuasion, base vote. All those dynamics are things we have to engage in, but real authentic community engagement is priceless.
I'm gonna give you a few numbers for folks that I keep hyping up Rafa and what happened in New Jersey. Let me put, instead of just the Chuck Rocha spin, let me give you the real numbers from some of the largest municipalities in New Jersey and the way that they voted over the last few years. In a place like Patterson, in 2021, Murphy, who was the Democrat, got 70% of the vote in Patterson. In 2024, 3 years later, Harris gets 28%. Plus, he wins by 28%. Let me back up. Murphy wins by 70. And then 3 years later, Harris just wins by 28 in Patterson. And then a year later, 1 year later, not 3 years, 1 year later, last night, Mikey Sherrill got 71% of the vote. It went right back to the Murphy levels in less than 1 year. It's incredible, this swing of this vote that we keep talking about with Latinos. They're not a rock-solid Democrat. They're not a rock-solid Republican. They're going to vote for folks who they can try to believe in. One of the places that's talked about a lot is Passaic. Nellie Poe, the new congresswoman there. Murphy in this district in 2021 gets about 35% a win in that he wins by 38%, 35%. And then 3 years later, Donald Trump, this blew people's mind. Donald Trump wins Passaic in 2024, just a year ago, by 7 points. The first time maybe ever, Rafa, that a Republican won it.
It's the first time since it's been as diverse as it is. That's been a major Latino community for many decades.
So it goes from a +7 Trump to last night, Mikey Sherrill wins it by 30. So, I mean, that's incredible numbers coming back. And then in places like West New York, Murphy wins in 21 by 49 points, 49 points. But then Kamala Harris just wins by 13. Keep in mind, different turnouts now. Lots of turnout in 24, no turnout in 21 or 20 right now this year, even though this was historic off year. I keep saying that because I want to center y'all in facts. Mikey Sherrill gets +57. As a reminder, Murphy got +49, Harris got +13, Mikey Sherrill +57. These are dramatic swings that we saw in places with lots of working class people. Rafa, you ever been to North Bergen? Down in North Bergen, Murphy got +40, Harris was only +6, and then Mikey Sherrill brings it back to +35.
Our brother Sid Wilson grew up in that community.
Oh, was that who that was?
Yeah, that's that community at North Bergen. Those are streets. I'm all very familiar with all those communities. Got a lot of family, a lot of connections. And for people that aren't familiar with Jersey politics, this is an environment where the current Democratic governor isn't particularly popular here, and this beat us over 60-year trend where Democrats or neither party had won three governors races in a row in over 60 years. So there was a lot of headwinds against Mikey Sherrill, all things being equal. And I think this shows, among other things, the profound dissatisfaction across demographics with Donald Trump. And so he has no, and that led to him having no coattails in this election.
65 years to be exact was the last time that a Democrat had won re-election after serving 2 terms. So no Democrat in 65 years had won a 3rd term as that. As we're looking at the exit here of going out of the Substack here for the day, Rafa, leave our people with some words of wisdom for folks that are putting together campaign plans for 2026, thinking about what they saw last night. What advice do you have? There's a lot of folks that listen to this Substack that are political professionals, a lot of reporters. Give me some of your words of wisdom to take us out, and I'll close us up.
Well, I think the bottom line is the more we listen, the more we engage, the more we champion, the more we invest in our local Latino leaders in these communities, whether they're congressional candidates, and I want to shout out, we've got some really exciting congressional candidates in Northeast Corridor, like Carol Cuadrado, one of the candidates for that congressional seat of Pennsylvania. Brian Varela in that New Jersey 7 race is a young man that we need to keep an eye on. And around the country, those are just examples. The more our local elected officials, which is a big factor for Cheryl's win, the more we listen, bring them to the table, fight for their issues, and invest, the more we're gonna see gains and maintain our gains in the Latino electorate. We have the great thing we have in abundance in our communities is local leaders, and you know, uh, we need to continue to support them, engage them, and however they're connected to your campaigns. It's not going to be some slick ad that's going to pull out Latinos. It's going to be that real engagement with the Latino community, and people have to see that you're fighting for them. What the question that we got consistently from Latinos at the doors in New Jersey was, we just want to know more about this woman. We just want to know about Congresswoman Cheryl. What has she done that's shown us that she's championed for the Latino community? And I have to give her credit. Down the stretch, she really invested a lot of not only in media, Spanish language media, but in retail politics. Uh, I think she did a very strong job. Her pitch at the end, in an authentic way, in Latino communities around the state. So all of that comes into play. But if you are engaging local Latino leaders in your campaign, you're going to see and invest in them in a real way. You're going to see the benefits in your campaign. No question about it.
And a special hat tip to campaign co-chairman, co-chairwoman, excuse me, Patricia Campos Medina.
Oh, one of the most powerful Latino organizers in the country, and I think a big part of the winning formula. We were proud to stand with her when we did our endorsement, along with Latina Civic Action, a group of powerful Latina leaders, along with labor leaders from SEIU and LIUNA and others, at our endorsement event with Janet Borgia about a month ago. And you're gonna Patricia, for those that don't know, is one of the most influential Latinas in American politics writ large, and is going to be, I would imagine, one of the most influential voices in the incoming Cheryl administration. So definitely a big hat tip to Patricia.
Patricia, for those of you who may not know, I've known her for almost 30 years. She came up through as an intern for LACLA and worked with us, and she's a dear sister of mine, has been a dear friend, helped me get a lot of work in New Jersey and help advocate for me and Rafa. Rafa, again, hat tip to our friend Patricia. Rafa, again, is the executive director of Unidos US. Unidos US is the largest Latino civic organization with over 250 community-based organizations around the country. This is not some fly-by-night operation. It's a big deal. It's a big-ass deal. And he has been running the political operation over there for a long time. And lucky they get to work with Solidarity, and Solidarity gets to work with them. Hat tip again to all the work that Daisy, who me and Rafa both rely on, did a bunch of this work. And we want to give a hat tip to Daisy and Rafa. From the bottom of my heart, thank you, and congratulations once again on a great job last night. And thank all of you for tuning in today.
Appreciate you, brother. Keep up the great work, Chuck. Love you a lot, man. Thanks again for the Revolutionario.
Woo! Let's go, baby. See y'all later.
Talk to you.